In order to actually use the input that we have, this vector, we need a command that takes this and does something with it. And in this case, it is translate. So if you type translate, you're probably very familiar with this since you've already used Maya. It's moving a 3D object around in 3D space. That's what translation does. Under game object where it says use owner, this means you don't have to change it if it's applied to the same object you want to move. So if the object you want to move has the state on it, you don't have to change this, but like let's say you want to move the terrain for some reason, you could use specify game object and you could move the terrain in here, and then it would move the terrain instead. Sometimes useful, not in this case. The vector we need is the player input, and you don't have to do anything with this, but like let's say you needed to know specifically which direction they were going on the X, then you could store this as a variable and you would have just the X value stored, and you could check that during the gameplay to see if anything has to be done, like a particle effect or who knows what. So I'm just going to remove this entirely and delete that little thing I made. So we should be able to move the player already. However, our game camera is not the same as the scene camera. I'm going to press play anyway. And with that, we are now able to move around quite quickly. There's no physics, you shouldn't fall off, but you can move around. So the first thing we want to do is fix the camera up. So you could decide on an angle that you want to go, like this. And then instead of moving the camera around like this and trying to get it close to the player manually and rotating it, you get the point. You can just select the main camera, go to game object, align with view, and that'll put it right behind the player. So when we press play, you will get a better view of what's happening. Yay, it works. We can move around. You might have actually noticed that when you hit the keyboard buttons, it doesn't really line up with the way the camera is facing. So you would expect to press W and go forward, but you go way off that way, and the reason is the camera isn't lined up. So the next thing we have to do is actually assign a camera controller, or nothing else is going to work. The camera controller is often called a camera rig because of the complex actions the camera usually needs to do. Like let's say you run into a side of building, do you want to clip through the building, or do you want the camera to kind of bump into the building and glide across it? You don't want it to vibrate. And it can be a little bit of a complex process, which is why it's awesome that we have this control, because it'll do all of that for you and you don't really have to specify very many things, which is great. To assign it, we're going to click on the main camera and go up to component, down to Udi, the company who made this, go to camera rigs, camera controller. This will create a camera controller script on the main camera. You don't have to do anything here, you just have to set what type. In this game, I think third person would be the best, so I'm going to click third person. Hey, this was set up, great. The thing that we have to do first, the input source has already been assigned, but we need to put the anchor in. And the anchor is, what is this camera going to follow? What is it going to be attached to? It's going to be attached to the player. And at first, when you attach it and click play, it's going to seem like it's not working. And that is because when you press forward, which is the camera just rotated to the way this capsule is actually facing, it doesn't seem like anything's happening, but it is. It's just not easy to tell because the terrain is, well, terrain. There's nothing else on here. So we could definitely do with a few markers at least. How about some cubes? So I'm going to right click and create an empty game object to organize things. So I call them corrals. This is not what other people do, but to me, corrals are just where you store all of the same type object. So 3D object and cube. That looks marvelous. Let's scale this. I'm going to scale this to like 3 by 3. And then just move it somewhere. Doesn't really matter where. We just need some frames of reference here. So I'm going to put the cube into the cube corral and then duplicate the cube by pressing Ctrl D. And I'll do this a few times to just make some cubes around the scene so we can have some frames of reference here. That didn't work at all. And I think 3D objects do it as well, not just 2D, but to snap things together you hold down V and pick the corner and then drag it to another object and you can just snap them together, which is kind of awesome, huh? So I'll also duplicate this one. See, I wonder if I can snap it to the train that way. No, it just kind of throws a fit. I am Cubehead, the successor to Lady Gaga. And now when we press play, we can actually test to see if everything is working correctly. And yay! We can also look around by holding down right click. I think the camera is too close to the person. And when I press forward, it's wanting to go the opposite direction entirely. So we'll probably have to line up the camera with the person in order for this to all work out. And we're back! As often happens when a person purchases an asset, it will work fine in their demo scenes, but even though you follow documentation, you do A, B, and C, either a script doesn't import or just something doesn't quite go right. And that's when you just hijack the demo scene, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And hey, it's a learning opportunity. You'll probably have to do it a lot in the future. So go to the scene that you have, take the player, click and drag down here. It'll make a new prefab for you right here. And then you can just make duplicates of it all over the place, which is great. And it keeps your Playmaker FSM, so you don't have to do any work on that. You already have the input and none of that has to change. So make sure you're in your assets folder, you know, the root. Go to UDI, I like to say that, UDI, demos, camera controller, scenes, third person. And here we have a lovely person who we're going to hijack. And because we didn't import any like the standard Unity assets, which you'll probably never use in a real game anyway, it's going to not have any animations. It's using default Unity animations, that way there's no copyright issues. They're there just for people to use like this. And although this looks a little bit more fashionable, I think we should continue to just use the player capsule, because you don't want to get your opinion colored by looking at someone else's art or like this terrain. You might start to think, wow, that looks really good, but then when you import your poly terrain with almost no detail on it, you're like, oh man, I'm horrible. No. So keep it basic. We'll do the art later. The art is the easy part, I promise. It's writing a story that's the hard part. So I hope you got this, because I sure as hell don't. So we're going to abuse his little guy a little bit farther by taking the player, dragging him right on top so the player gets parented, reset the player so we can steal the position, drag the player off, delete this guy, you don't need him, delete the canvas, don't need that, input source. Here you can change the left or right mouse button to a different configuration, like you just want the left mouse button or you just want the right or you prefer middle. For the time being, we're just going to leave it this way. It'll be fine for prototype. There's a lot of camera controllers. There's infinite ways we can customize the camera or change it. But for the time being, this works. On our player, who I can press F to zoom in on. Alright, this is the Z-axis, and here's the X-axis. I think this way is forward. Going to the right. I'm just going to take a wild guess. I'm either wrong or right. I'm feeling spear today. Alright, we have our Hunchback of Notre Dirt. Cough. Crowd goes silent. Crowd gets tired of the cough jokes. We need the camera rig, and we don't have an anchor. So we're going to drag the player over here. So now we have it anchored to something. Something tells me this is not going to go well, but hey, whatever. I was wrong. Thankfully, you can actually edit things at runtime. So, for example, I could bring it this way, and it would be over there, and I could bring it this way. And here's a learning opportunity. And now it's where I want it. And when I press unplay, it's going to snap back to where it was. We want to keep this. So go up here and press copy component. And just for the sake of testing, yes, everything is working the way we want it. We can stop play mode. Today, please. Come on, you can do it. No, don't play again. Alright, you're great. And then on the spear, you can paste the component values. So now when we press play, it'll be forward facing, everything will go great. So next, all we have to do is dialogue, and then, setting up the dialogue, and I'll show you how to edit it, and then you should be able to mostly just make the game. The only thing that you will need to do is set up how to fire the triggers, like you get around the map, and if you need more props, I got you covered. There's a lot of free things out there. So I've tried some free assets, and I don't want it to color your opinion of what your asset should end up looking like at the end. It'll be hard to unsee. But if you need some visuals, you can throw some things into the scene and work around them. Set up the cue points of where things fire, how the scene is going to transition from one person to another. We'll just tackle each thing one at a time until the game is built.